Good morning and welcome to worship at Bart Centenary United Methodist Church. We're so glad you came. This morning, our reading is broken into three different sections: Genesis 24, 34 to 38, Genesis 24, 42 to 49, and Genesis 24, 58 to 67. Hear the word of the Lord. To put our reading into context, what has already happened before we pick up is that Abraham has called a servant to his side, and he has asked this servant to go to where he had come from, where his people still lived, and to go back there and find a wife for Isaac. He has given him instructions on how to do that, and he has sent him on his way. The servant arrives just as we pick up. At verse 34. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become wealthy. He has given him flocks and herds, and silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old, and he has given him all that he has. My master made me swear, saying, You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house, to my kindred, and get a wife for my son. The servant continues to tell his story in Genesis 24, 42 to 49. I came today to the spring and said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now you will only make successful the way I am going. I am standing here by the spring of water. Let the young woman who comes out to draw, to whom I shall say, Please give me a little drink of water from your jar to drink, and who will say to me, Drink, and I will draw water for your camels also. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. Before I had finished speaking in my heart, there was Rebekah, coming out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew. I said to her, Please let me drink. She quickly let down her jar from her shoulder and said, Drink, and I will also water your camels. So I drank, and she also watered the camels. Then I asked her, Whose daughter are you? She said, The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. So I put a ring on her nose and the bracelets on her arms. Then I bowed my head and worshipped the Lord, and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to obtain the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now then, if you will deal loyally and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so that I may turn either to the right hand or to the left. The family negotiates with the servant of Abraham, and they come to an agreement that they will allow Rebekah to go to Abraham and to marry Abraham's son, Isaac. And Rebekah agrees to do this, but the family would like her to stay, and the servant of Abraham would like to get going right away. And so, after this question, they leave it up to Rebekah, and this is where we begin. Genesis 24:58. And they called Rebekah and said to her, Will you go with this man? And she said, I will. So they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse, along with Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah, and they said to her, May you, our sister, become thousands of myriads. May your offspring gain possession of the gates of their foes. Then Rebekah and her maids rose up, mounted the camels, and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went on his way. Now, they have a long journey. They finally get back to where Abraham and Isaac are. And this is where our next set of texts begin at verse 62. Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi and was settled in the Negev. Isaac went out in the evening to walk in the field, and looking up he saw camels coming. And Rebekah looked up, and when she saw Isaac, she slipped quickly from the camel, and said to the servant, "Who is the man over there, walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself, and the servant told Isaac all the things he had done. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. He took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So as we continue our summer quest, discovering what we can from our spiritual family tree, we continue to seek what truth we can find about God and our relationships with God in these stories from Genesis. Today, as we explore this story, this love story of Isaac and Rebekah, we discover that it's not the typical boy meets girl love story. It's more like father sends servant, servant travels, servant finds a girl, has negotiations, girl decides to come along, girl comes back to the place where they came from, and then boy meets girl. It's not your typical love story. And yet there is so much to this strange love story. There's so much under the surface. If we dig deep into this story, we begin to puzzle out some hidden gems of truth that we can find within it. Courage and love and faith can be found. And we're reminded of the trustworthiness of our God, even in the most intimate of things. Let's look through this story and see where we can find these different attributes. First, faith. We see Abraham's faith in God to bring the bride his son needed. He had so much faith in God's ability to bring the correct bride that he himself nor his son go to find her. He sends a servant with instructions and trusts that God will bring the right girl for his son. And this is an important person that he's bringing into their lives. This woman will hold the promise alongside of Isaac, the promise that Abraham received after Abraham dies. And he has to be very cognizant of his coming death with the death of his wife. We also see faith in Abraham's servant, a faith that must reflect the faith of Abraham, the faith that he shared with all of those in his household. And while this servant is overwhelmed with the task that he has been given, he doesn't hesitate to turn to God in his time of need. He turns to God in prayer, and he counts on God to guide him in choosing this wife. Indeed, the faith element is strong in this story. There's also courage. The courage is first revealed in the servant. He is traveling quite a long distance here to go back to Ur where they began. And this courage to travel that long distance with 10 camels full of riches. This does not put you in the safest position as you are traveling along with your entourage. And yet he has the courage to do it. He moves along. We also see courage in young Rebekah. She has obviously been taught the value of hospitality, which is so important and was so important and is so important in Middle Eastern cultures. And she does not shy away from hard work, camels can drink a lot. And she offers to water 10 of them alongside this man whom she doesn't know. She's clearly willing to put in some hard work in honor of that hospitality which she has learned at her mother's side. The text that we didn't read also tells us that she's beautiful. Never hurts in a love story for the young lady to be beautiful and the young man to be handsome, and we are not disappointed in this story. But what becomes apparent in the story from her actions is that she is courageous. It takes a great deal of courage to go to a strange place, to marry a person you do not know beyond the servant of his father, and to trust yourself into the care of God in that journey and in that marriage. Indeed, young Rebecca has courage to spare. But there's also love in this story. And Isaac's story has always been a story of love. He was a longed-for child, long awaited and born of a miracle in his mother's old age. If ever a child was loved, it was Isaac. His first 4 decades of life, we can only imagine how his mother had loved him, had cared for him, I'm pretty sure had doted on him. And we can fairly assume that his mother's death was devastating for him. The text tells us that the love he found with Rebekah comforted him in his grief. And Rebekah and Isaac, despite, or maybe because of their strange beginning, were a love match. And not all marriages within the biblical text claim this. This wasn't something people assumed would be the case. And so it's more significant than we might think at first glance that it says he loved her. The text says, then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. He took Rebekah and she became his wife, and he loved her. This love is going to be important to remember as we move on to the next few stories about their children. Indeed, they do deeply love one another, and yet children will bring something new to the mix. So through Isaac and Rebekah's love story, we learn that more about what it means for the people of God to have faith in God. We learn that this kind of faith that God is looking for from us takes courage. We learn that love is an important component in our interaction with God and in God's interaction with us and in our interactions with one another. This text also reinforces 3 lessons that we have already learned in Genesis. It reinforces that God is trustworthy, that you can count on him to come through, that God keeps his promises, that the promise he gave to Abraham will go on through Isaac. And in order for it to go on, Isaac is going to have a wife. And Isaac's wife is going to have to be blessed, and those children are going to have to be blessed. And it reinforces that God cares even about the small details of our lives. So much that we can go to God about those details, and God will respond. We need only have faith and courage and love enough to trust him in order to go to him. Let us learn these lessons from our spiritual ancestors, for they are important ones. May we display such faith and courage and love in the pursuit of living lives as children of God as the examples that have been set for us in Genesis. Amen and amen.